Jason, how you doing, brother?
Hey, how's it going, Accolonn? Nice to finally meet you. Anyways, so my question, I kind of wanted to start a little bit of a discussion in a way.
Yeah.
So just recently, Blizzard has announced that they're doing a new FATED system for raiding. So I guess that's going to be their way to keep raids like throughout the expansion more relevant. So in case you are, before I continue on, are you aware of it at the FATED system?
Are you talking about the? Are you talking about what they're doing in 925 with the sort of almost like turning raids into a Mythic Plus light version of itself?
Yes, and then they're also awarding gear that's kind of acceptable. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go on a whole tangent. So anyways, my question was basically, even though this is like looking like a good step in the right direction, do you think they should continue on this path, or do you think they should revert back to how it was in Wrath of the Lich King, if you can recall? Because back in Wrath, during ICC, they did the weekly raids where they had everyone like, hey, you need to go do Naxxramas and do it up to this boss, and you'll get X amount of awards for that.
Yeah.
Or they even did the, if you can also recall, during ICC, they also did these little, that you would do an ICC boss, or there would be a mini boss on the outside, and you'd have to do certain mechanics.
Yeah. So like a challenge,
for that.
Sort of like an issued challenge for something that gives you extra things as soon as you kill it. I remember that.
Yes. So, yeah, my question basically is, do you think they should continue on with what they're doing with the FATED system, or should they kind of do what they did in Wrath of the Lich King?
So, if you asked me this question a year ago, I would have been like, what the fuck is this? I don't care. Now that I've played Final Fantasy, my opinion on this have completely shifted. In Final Fantasy, every single raid and every single piece of content that has ever existed in the game is relevant still today, right? Coils of Bahamut is still considered one of the harder pieces of content to do, and it's the very first raid that ever came out in Final Fantasy. It's basically their AQ 14, the equivalent of it. It's very difficult, the bosses are extremely challenging, and the reason it's this is because they have a minimum item level, no echo system, which basically depowers you to where you would have been when this raid was current, right? So it keeps you at, it sort of literally de-levels you to where this raid was current once. And it provides so much content to the player base. There are guilds that literally only do that. That's all they do. They like free companies that literally only do old raids. They don't do any of the new shit. They just go do Coils of Bahamut and stuff like that on a Friday night because that's what they enjoy doing. So I think the sort of FATED system for raids is a very huge step in the right direction for me, as far as WoW goes. I do. Yeah. The issue I have with it is, again, I get the sense that this is going to be one of those FOMO systems where if you didn't do it in 925, well, bad luck, you have to wait until those raids make their return. And it's kind of like, why not just have those raids be always available, right? And then what I would actually do is take your idea for sort of like raid challenges and just expand it. So you have both, where there's a weekly raid challenge that puts you into an old raid, one of the FATED raids that's already been updated to be at max level, but you have to go back and do that raid to get to one boss that you have to kill in order to unlock the raid goodies from that raid. So it gives people a reason to go back and do some of that older content.
Yeah. And kind of to touch up on that, I remember like vividly back in the day when I was doing ICC, and I just remember, I believe it's the second boss, is it Lady Death Whisper? I can't remember what the name is.
Yeah.
So I just remember having you walk up to you're in the entrance of the next boss, and you see a quest NPC, and it's basically keep this NPC alive throughout the fight,
Yeah.
And then you'll get rewarded with extra emblems and all that. Because back then you used your emblems to buy your gear and all that.
Yeah.
And I just kind of wish they would build on that, because after Wrath ended, they just completely stopped with that whole system.
I think Wrath, but this is sort of where we always get to with Blizzard, right? They forget so much of what used to be so fucking cool. In World of Warcraft. And Bruno, yes, emblems in World of Warcraft is very similar to tombstones in Final Fantasy XIV. But you are correct in that there's a lot of lessons that Blizzard could learn from some of the older raids that would be fun for people to actually experience again, and things that could absolutely have been pushed forward. So just building on keep this NPC alive. Just the previous caller mentioned that, what do I think about raid difficulties? Well, if you had such a thing as normal and then normal hard mode, heroic and then heroic hard mode, you could effectively drop Mythic from the game entirely, because heroic hard mode could be the Mythic. And then you could have things like this that just, if you choose to accept that quest, it makes the fight just infinitely harder, where you now have to really fucking focus on what it is that you're doing, because it's gonna fundamentally change how this boss is gonna have to be approached, and maybe how it's gonna be tanked, how it's gonna be healed, all of that shit. Just, I feel like there's a lot more that Blizzard could do with their raiding system, other than just come up with new raids every 4 months or 6 months.
Yeah, and definitely, like, Final Fantasy has also kind of, like, opened that door too. That's one thing I do like, is that players can go back, and they don't make it too complicated. Like, they had their system put in place, and one thing that bothered me during to kind of piggyback off of what you were just talking about, one thing that did kind of bother me a bit is I felt like Blizzard over time has just gotten they made their systems for raiding too complicated. Like, did we necessarily need like 4 different difficulties? Did we need Raid Finder, Normal, Heroic, and Mythic? Yeah. We could have just easily had a normal mode that everyone can either pug or whatever. And then Heroic, just like how it used to be. That's your hardcore players. And then if you wanted Mythic, you could have had it kind of like how Final Fantasy is. Have it for strictly cosmetics that says, hey, I'm a badass. Yeah. Come do this.
So the reason we are in the mess we are right now with WoW raiding as well as Mythic Plus is focus. Ian Hazzikostas, before he became the lead director or the director for World of Warcraft, Ian Hazzikostas was a raid designer. That's what he did. Ian Hazzikostas is also a hardcore raider. It's basically the only thing he does in the game. Last time I checked his character profile, he had not set foot inside LFR, and he completed like all of the normal bosses, some of the heroic bosses, and all of the mythic bosses he had already completed, right? So this is a hardcore raider. Now, if you have a game where your main focus is around the hardcore player base, you're almost forced to create more and more systems for everyone to partake in. So LFR is a direct result of Blizzard not knowing what to do with their casual player base, because they have a bunch of casual players that can't do normal, can't do heroic, absolutely can't do mythic. But what else are they supposed to do? Well, let's just make an even easier raid difficulty, right? And then you have normal dungeon, heroic dungeon, mythic dungeon, and now Mythic Plus dungeon. And it's kind of like, well, okay, we have a bunch of people that is too good for mythic dungeons, but not good enough necessarily for raids. What do we give them? Well, let's just add more dungeons. Because if you're a hammer, every single problem looks like a nail. And this is what Ian and his team does. Whenever they find that a lot of the player base isn't, for example, doing mythic raids, well, maybe we should just have another raiding option, one that's even easier for everyone to partake in. And it's kind of like, if your game was more focused around the casual audience, which, by the way, is the massive audience, it's the biggest audience of the game, or casual players, not raiders. Raiders is a very insignificant number of players. If you actually made content for casual players, you wouldn't need this incredibly top-heavy, over-designed system almost impossible to explain system, right? Because you have to explain to someone, oh, okay, if you want to start raiding in World of Warcraft, you need gear. Now, you're first going to do normal dungeons, then you're going to do heroic dungeons, then you're going to do mythic dungeons. Once you have the gear from mythic dungeons, you can start raiding. Now, you're going to want to do the normal raid, then you're going to want to do the heroic raid, and then you're going to want to do the mythic raid. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to just do it once, because you're basically going to want to run normal until you have the gear to go heroic, then you want to run heroic until you have the gear for mythic, and it's kind of like, okay, wait a second, I should write this fucking down, because there seems to be a whole lot of things that I have to remember in order to just raid, right? It's over-designed because their focus is on this is why players are playing our game. Not realizing that where is the majority of the WoW player base? They're in the old fucking raids, getting transmog mounts, right? They're running ICC for the 500th time because they're hoping for Invincible to drop. They're not doing your max level new shiny raid. They're waiting for the new shiny raid to be old so they can go farm the fucking mounts in there. That's where the majority of your player base is, because they're casual. They want casual content, and LFR is not casual content. It's just easy max level content.
And the thing is, they can easily just... It's like that saying, simple is more. And what they could be doing, and I think they're trying to move into that direction, given like the profession system that they're putting in for Dragonflight, is they really need to just start thinking about, okay, what do players, why are they playing my game? Like, what do they like to do in my game? And there's even been like, not to get all weeb about this, but like even like animes that depict fantasy games, you always have your players that strictly just do professions and nothing else. Yeah. Well, Final Fantasy, and I'm sure you're aware because you've been playing a lot, is they implement systems for that player base that only wants to do professions. Yeah. The Ishgardian, the housing system for Ishgard, they had players like, hey, all professions come here and you're going to help build the housing system. Yeah. Like, they need to start doing things like that. And I think Blizzard did a similar situation in with the, what was it, the war effort during Classic World of Warcraft?
The war effort to some extent, the opening of the Gates of Anchorage to some extent. Even though whenever Blizzard have ever attempted this, it's always been through this more hardcore lanes, right? So they've always sort of approached it through the hardcore lanes. And this is where, again, I come back to, what is your focus? If you listen to Yoshi P, and in every interview that he's ever been sort of asked about this, Yoshi P actually straight up admitted he is a selfish son of a bitch, insofar as he wants every single MMO player in the world to play Final Fantasy XIV. And the way he does this is by designing content for every type of player in his game. So he looks at, all right, what is it that some people do? Well, a lot of people love crafting. All right, we need to make sure that there's a massive crafting system here. Other people like raiding. All right, we'll make sure that there's raiding. Some people like RP. Well, how about this? We'll give them all the tools required to RP. We'll even, and this is going to blow a lot of people's minds because it fucking blew mine, there are wedding packages available on their website. Wedding packages. If you want to marry someone, you actually can purchase a wedding package that comes with a venue, your own choice of bouquet, music, lighting, all that shit. You get a dress and a suit, as well as a mount that you just have forever, as well as a ring that has an entire quest line attached to it that now you can teleport to your betrothed wherever you are in the world. And it's a giant ceremony where you can invite up to 80 guests. Everyone goes through this massive cinematic cutscene thing where you're standing in the cathedral and you see these two people up in front getting married, sliding on the rings. It's a massive thing. And every single guest is in the cutscenes, by the way, so you can see yourself at the wedding. This is the kind of stuff that Final Fantasy designs. Why? because they know that there is a player base that loves this sort of thing. That's why they play the game. So they identify the player base, and then they think, okay, what tools do we need to give this player base in order to keep themselves busy in our game? World of Warcraft desperately needs to start doing that.
Well, and then to circle back on the rating part, how they're keeping things simple is, well, as you and I both know, raiding is literally just 8 players. They can easily balance fights around 8 players, and everyone has their roles. And not only that, even class design is a lot easier for them, I believe, because every class is literally just, this is what you do. This is, there's no specs and all that, which I do kind of miss the talent trees, but there's no specs. So whenever something doesn't feel strong enough, they can easily bring it up a little more. Or if they feel like one class is like maybe becoming a little too complicated, they can easily rebalance it.
Yeah.
Whereas in World of Warcraft, and you and I both know, we both play Warlocks, by the way, in World of Warcraft.
You know,
and the thing I hated...
Class. I like it. Man of class.
Yes. The thing I hated was... Okay, so... I'll use Shadowlands as an example. So when I played Shadowlands on my Warlock, I was told, okay, if you want to be a raider, you need to play Night Fae. Yeah. I'm like, all right, I don't like Night Fae, but I'll play it because I want to be as best as I can in my raid.
Yeah.
So then they're like, okay, you got to play Destruction. That's the best spec.
Yep.
So you start playing Destruction. And then you play through it, and they're like, okay, Destruction isn't that good anymore now that the more gear has came in. You got to actually play Affliction now. And then it's like, okay, now I got to learn Affliction. And then I start getting used to Affliction, and then all of a sudden the new raid hits, and it's literally, okay, now Demonology is the better spec, so you need to learn how to play Demonology. And when I'll admit, that was very complicated for me to learn, because everything has to be perfectly timed and all that, and I was getting frustrated. And then to come to find out, oh, by the way, if you want to play Demonology, you might want to try out Necrolords and switch to them and then grind out all that. I'm like, this is too complicated for one player. And then when I came to Final Fantasy, it was like, oh, Warrior isn't doing that good. You may want to try Paladin. Oh, okay, that's an easy fix. I don't have to. It's literally,
you'd literally just play the Paladin.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything is like simple. It's not like like all this complicated stuff where it has to go through all these different reworks and rebalances. It's literally like, for them, it feels like they can just press a button.
So a lot of what you just said is sadly not necessarily just WoW's fault, like Blizzard's fault. The players do bear a lot of the sort of blame in this regard.
Yes,
because
I totally agree.
Because if we go to Warcraft logs very quickly here, right? So we go to Warcraft logs and we just quickly look at balance, because this is something a lot of people don't always like. People will go, oh, you have to be Affliction now, that's the best. And then it's like, well, if I look at the actual logs, is it really that great? Because if you look at the actual logs right now on Mythic for the newest raid, right, you have Destruction and Demonology both at the top, right? That's for the whole raid. Both of them are at the top. But in terms of the actual difference in DPS, it is fucking tiny. Like, the actual difference in DPS is not really even... it's negligible. But because the 2 purple lines are at the top, and the other purple line is like 6th or 7th, now you have to switch. And the issue is, it's not in the mind of individual players, it's in the collective of the players. Because the collective of the players is, if you're not Destruction, we're not bringing you to the raid. It's like, well, fuck me then. I guess I have to switch Destruction now. And if you're not Demonology, we're not bringing you to the raid. You want to play an Affliction, go join a fucking pleb guild. It's like, dude, you realize that if I can play my Affliction well, I'm going to do better than playing my Demonology not well? No. You learn how to play, bitch. It's like, dude, just... It's not necessarily as important. Now, some of it is down 100% to Blizzard. And the way that Blizzard have sort of made raiding its prime jewel, like it's the crown jewel of the game. And so logs and everything else is sort of the most important thing in the game, because that's all the game is about. Where Final Fantasy doesn't really have that. Most people understand that the balance within Final Fantasy is within 5% of one another. So, you know, doesn't really matter all that much. I feel like where World of Warcraft actually, where Blizzard does get a lot of the blame, is in Mythic Plus, because there are certain classes and specs really, in Mythic Plus that is just dead on arrival. This is something like Affliction.
Yeah.
Affliction does not work in Mythic Plus. It just doesn't, because you need classes that can blow things up, and Affliction can't do that. So it's a horrible thing that I don't know what the fix is for.
Yeah, and it's just like in Final Fantasy, because I even see like top-end statics in Final Fantasy where they'll have a machinist, and like right now, I think it's machinist right now, is considered like the worst DPS spec in the game, but
might be.
There's still people being brought in for it, because even though it's considered the worst DPS, but when you look at the numbers compared to the rest of them, they're still pretty up there. It's just, it's the bottom of the other ones.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Parsing, in my opinion, is a disease. It is a disease that will kill video games, because most people don't understand how to use parsing. They don't understand how Warcraft logs are supposed to be used.
Ironically, I'm the one that linked you that video.
Yeah, I mean, that was an amazing video, because I agree. The guy have been, like, literally said what I've been saying for such a long time. And it is. You shouldn't be looking at WoW logs or Warcraft logs and going, oh, look at my fucking orange passes. It's like, dude, that's not why these logs exist. It's to compare how you're playing. So looking at one fight to the next, how many Chaos Bolts did you get off? How can you get more Chaos Bolts? You know, how much damage did you take? And is there avoidable damage that you maybe didn't have to take? So it's to learn. It's not to see how much like deeps you can put on the fucking thing. As long as you can kill the boss, that's really all that matters. But sadly, that's not how WoW thinks. I know, because my guild used to be like this. As soon as, well, I say used to be because it was for a very short amount of time that my guild was this, right towards the end. But as soon as we killed a boss and someone had great passes, the officer meeting would basically be like, so are we going to replace that guy? His DPS was really bad. And I'm like, dude, the boss is dead. Like, the boss is fucking dead. So
I ran into that same thing where I didn't, and that was another thing that kind of annoyed me, because like it kind of barred me from joining certain guilds, because I'd be coming back to the game and I'd be like, hey, I'm looking to raid. Is there any guilds that are recruiting a warlock?
Link your logs.
The first question would always be, well, what do your logs look like? And I'm just like, I hadn't played in a while. Well, we need logs because we got to see if we're getting a good player or not. And it's just like, I don't know what to tell you. And then I'd even have guilds where they're like, I don't care about your logs during progress. And then like the same day they'd be like, oh, you need to get those log numbers up. And I'm just like, didn't you just say you didn't care as long as we killed the boss?
Yep. But I mean, this is sadly just, this is something that, because it exists, players are going to put some amount of credence or some amount of importance in it. I don't know how you fix that. This is not something that I think Blizzard can fix. Because even Final Fantasy has this, and Yoshi P and the team are so anti-add-ons. And even in Final Fantasy, I mean, the video you linked me is a Final Fantasy player saying that logs are dog shit and you should stop caring about passing. This is the dude, go do yourself a favor and go look up Witcher 3 builds on Google. Just Google Witcher 3 builds. This is a single player, no scoreboard game. It's a single player fucking video game, right? There is no way to really compete with anyone in the game because it doesn't matter. It's just you playing the game. And there are optimal builds. Like the exact gear that you need for the build. And it's like, dude, if you finished the game, you had the right build, as far as I'm concerned, right? Like,
Yeah.
the only time your build would be fucked is if you couldn't actually kill the final boss. As long as you killed the final boss, congratulations, you had a good build. You played whatever the fuck was fun for you. The build that, by the way, is the best is an alchemy build where you become unkillable. Like, you can literally just not die, which is like, okay, so basically you're playing the game on the hardest difficulty, but you can't die. So what's the fun? Like, why is this a fun build? But this is the problem with the internet. The internet has to turn everything into a competition, and in my opinion, competition removes fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think that covered everything. I know you got a lot of people waiting, so I think I'll end it here. That was a great discussion.
Jason, I appreciate it, dude. I love the discussions. It's always awesome to hear what you guys have to say and sort of get insights into things that I don't necessarily think about because I play the game different to anyone else. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
See you later.
See you later, man.